Hello to everyone. My name is Scott Appleby, and I'm the Marilyn Keough Dean of the Keough School of Global Affairs here at the University of Notre Dame. Welcome to this book launch of The Practice of Human Development and Dignity, an important volume which showcases some of the best thinking and practice in the field of international development. The Kellogg Institute for International Studies, the host of this afternoon's event, is a research and practice pillar of the Keough School and a thought leader in integral human development, as is our moderator today, Clemens Sedmak, who is the director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies in the Keough School, also a vital unit of our school. Integral human development is our value proposition here at Keough, so to speak, and the goal around which the Keough School organizes, informs, and evaluates our work on development, democracy, peace building, education, human rights, and other areas central to human flourishing and human dignity. Professor Sedmak is one of the co-editors of the volume we are about to discuss. The other is Kellogg Institute Director Paolo Carrazzo, who hosted a superb conference and workshop on human dignity in Rome at the outset of this project some years ago, which I was pleased to attend and learned a great deal from the experts there. Paolo assembled a cohort of talented authors who are joined today by two distinguished commentators and friends. So again, welcome to all of you, and thanks to the Kellogg Institute for hosting this event and significant project.
Thank you so much, my Dean. Welcome, good afternoon. Welcome to our virtual book launch. This is a virtual event, but the issues that the book talks about are largely real and in person. In fact, the book explores the implications of taking the dignity of the human person and integral human development seriously. My name is Clemens Sedmak. I teach social ethics here at the Keough School, and I direct the Nanovic Institute, as Dean Appleby has mentioned. The book and the project behind it are really Paolo Carrazzo's brainchild. He generously asked me to come on board and assist a bit with the editing. Much work has also been done by Beth Simpson-Lapsey, who has since left the Kellogg Institute. I hope it was not because of our book. We are really grateful that we can launch this book today. It took a while from conception to launch. The gestation period of the African elephant is 645 days. We have certainly outnumbered that. Please allow me to introduce our panel that will discuss the book. I will introduce them in order of speaking slots, and then they will just give us their inputs one after the other. Paolo Carrazzo, for those who do not know that, is professor of law, concurrent professor of political science, and director of the Kellogg Institute for International Studies here in Notre Dame. Paolo is wonderful. His expertise is in the areas of comparative constitutional law, human rights, law and development, and international law. He has held numerous high-level appointments, including working for the Venice Commission, the State Department, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and the Vatican. Paolo has served the Holy See. He has been a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences since 2016. Human dignity and human rights are dear to his heart. Thank you, Paolo, not only for your time, but for making this book possible in the first place.
Thank you, Clemens.
Reverend David Hollenbach is a Jesuit and distinguished research affiliate with the Kellogg Institute here in Notre Dame. He's also the Pedro Arrupe Distinguished Research Professor in the Ward School of Foreign Service, Senior Fellow at the Barclays Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs, and Affiliate Professor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Georgetown University. David is so impressive. David is an advocate for human rights and humanitarian issues, largely in Africa, collaborating with the Jesuit Refugee Service and consulting with the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. David's book, Humanity in Crisis, was the topic of a panel hosted by the Keough School of Global Affairs in March last year. Thank you so much, David, for being with us today. We so appreciate it. And finally, Carolyn Wu. Carolyn is amazing. Carolyn Wu currently assists the University of Notre Dame on its highest level to engage in energy transition dialogues hosted by the Vatican and bringing CEOs of major energy companies to the table. She's also a distinguished President's Fellow for Global Development at Purdue University. During 2012 to 2016, Carolyn served as president and CEO of Catholic Relief Services, the official international humanitarian agency of the Catholic community in the United States. Prior to working with CRS, Carolyn served from 1997 to 2011 as Dean of Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business, which flourished under her leadership. And before that, Carolyn was a stellar researcher, winning Best Paper Awards by the Academy of Management. Dear Carolyn, thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon. We are so grateful. The choreography is welcome to the panelists, which has happened right now. Paolo Carrazzo will give 5 to 7 minutes of introduction. David Hollenbach will follow with about 10 minutes of an input, and Carolyn Wu will have a 10 minutes input as well, and then we open the floor for Q&A. Thank you so much. Paolo, please.
Thank you very much, Clemens, and thank you all for being here for this exciting moment for us. It's wonderful to see this project finally come to fruition. As Clemens said, it took many years of gestation to get here. The project itself started with 3 different conferences and book workshops in Rome and here in South Bend. But the intellectual roots of it, let's say, go back really much further than that. Along the 2 different tracks of development, you could say, that for decades were separate from each other. On the one hand, within the sphere of development work, for decades, there's been an increasing recognition that we need to attend to the human dimensions of development, not just efficiency, not just income generation, not just the economic dimensions of human well-being, but human development in a much broader sense. And that has come to be shown in the work of so many development agencies, NGOs, as well as all the way up to the UN Secretary General, has come to be signified by invoking the word dignity, that's what these organizations are about and serving when they serve human development. And yet it has been the case that although invoked as a signifier of a broader and humanistic approach, that understanding of dignity has been very little explored in the development context. Very little engagement of what it really means, and in a certain sense taken for granted that development and dignity go hand in hand. The second thread, separate from that, is more properly about the word dignity itself. For decades, there's been an intense and highly contested series of discussions about the meaning of human dignity in the context of human rights, in the context of bioethics, philosophy and theology. As we put it in the introduction to the book, dignity is contested in its status, in its foundation and justification, and in its enactment. So there's great confusion and uncertainty and controversy around a concept that some have even begun to characterize as stupid, empty, or merely a conversation stopper. So we find ourselves at a certain intellectual impasse in discussions about dignity. So this project was born out of the hypothesis that we could contribute simultaneously to both of those problems by bringing normative discourse regarding the ontological status of dignity into a dynamic conversation with the qualitative and quantitative insights that relate to the experience of dignity in the practice of human development. This volume thus strives for a dialectical relationship between theory and practice, and also between normative reflection and empirical observation and analysis. And it does so across multiple disciplines, the various social sciences, philosophy, law, development theory, and it also tries to draw on a number of detailed case studies of development practice. The result is a book that we hope makes at least 4 overarching contributions to the discussion. The first is a methodological one. The approach here gives emphasis to human experience and endeavors to conceptualize human dignity in the light of practice. It's inductive, therefore, referring to experiences and endeavoring to look at real people, not, as the introduction puts it, as epistemic objects or types of persons abstracted from the experience of their lives. But instead, it strives to take seriously and honor local knowledge and context and concreteness. Secondly, the book argues for a proper consideration of the non-material aspects of human life and human well-being, including the spiritual ones, especially the importance of the soft aspects of human agency, subjectivity, and interiority, arguing that we can't really understand human dignity in the context of development without thick understandings of these things. The third claim is that the book places centrally to the experience of human dignity the role of community and relationality, observing the way that it's embedded in the human person as a relational and social being, as a political animal. And this leads also to an understanding of the essential and universal places of vulnerability and dependence within the experience of human life and development. Thus, enacting dignity in development, we believe, leads us to an emphasis on accompaniment, on empathy and mutuality, on walking the development path together. It means understanding human needs and development in relationship to others rather than in an individualist paradigm. A fourth and final claim of the book is that the concept of dignity as informed by experience can in fact be translated into a language of projects and programs and into institutions as well. This isn't to be taken for granted in light of the other claims. If dignity and in development is understood in this highly localized, personalized, humanized way and captured in thick contextual descriptions, then do we lose the possibility to generalize? Well, a number of the case studies in the book are aimed at exploring how dignity, even understood in this richer and more holistic way, can nevertheless serve as a useful concept in planning efforts. It can be operationalized. We can assess the extent to which human dignity is honored in practice, including in institutionalized contexts like law, development policy, the operation of the market, and the processes of political and civic participation. So based on these four unifying claims across the chapters, we see one key conclusion emerging by reading them all together, that the future of development work stands and falls with a proper consideration of human dignity in practice. Our hope is that that claim will resonate both in helping us to make sense, greater sense of the concept of dignity as such, and also make a contribution to the humanization of development practice. Much more locally here at Notre Dame, our hope is that it helps us deepen our awareness of the meaning and implications of the Keough School's commitment to integral human development as its core operative principle. At the same time, I'll say in conclusion that if 2 decades of working on this topic have taught me anything, it's that any exploration of the meaning of human dignity can never be exhaustive. It is always rather an invitation to further inquiries, to deeper questions. This is necessarily so when we're speaking about the dignity of persons, because persons themselves cannot be exhausted or possessed. Dignity refers to the ultimate mystery and openness and freedom of human beings. So we're eager to see where this discussion might lead next. Before turning it over to our distinguished commentators here, I'll just close with a word of thanks. I'm grateful to Dean Appleby, Dr. Wu, and Father Hollenbach for helping us today, but even more to all of the contributors, many of whom are present on this in this discussion today, whose time and goodwill and patience and generosity made this possible. We learned so much from you and from one another. I'm thankful to Clemens for stepping in late in the process to help with the editing of the book very generously, to our extraordinary Kellogg staff who made the events here and in Rome possible and so successful, and among them foremost, Beth Labsey, without whom quite literally the book would not have ever appeared. Thank you all, and I'm eager to hear the comments of David and Carolyn.
Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you. I guess it's turned over to me at that point. I'm very grateful to be included in this discussion. I read the book with great interest and great pleasure, and it brought back some memories. A number of years ago, about, 3 years ago or so, Paolo and I jointly attended a conference at Oxford, sponsored jointly by the British Academy and by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Westminster. And it was on human dignity. And it led to a very substantial volume entitled Understanding Human Dignity, edited by a man named Christopher McCrudden. It was a very stimulating conference, but I thought all through the conference that Paolo and I both attended there, that the big lack in the discussion that was taking place there was how the concept of dignity that they were articulating, that we were articulating, was related to the problems of poverty and development in the world. If you look at that book, you'll see that it deals with dignity in the domain of bioethics and in the domain of law and criminal justice and so forth, but it has almost nothing in it about the relationship of human dignity to the issue of development. So the volume that we are discussing today, it seems to me, makes a very important contribution by supplementing the discussions of human dignity that have been going on, by bringing the dialogue out into the domain of its relation to development. And I think that's an extremely important contribution. It's true that many of the development agencies and of the humanitarian agencies around the world invoke dignity in their charters and in their goals and so forth. But very rarely is the topic articulated in any coherent way and with any theoretical sophistication. So this book makes an important contribution, it seems to me, by advancing our understanding of dignity in a way that has some theoretical depth, but also that addresses the development issue. A second point that I would like to make, and that is that it seems to me that the emphasis that is found throughout the book on how human dignity is profoundly situated or embedded in human relationships, in interconnectedness of persons with each other, is an extremely important contribution to the clarification of the notion of human dignity. Probably the classic modern articulation of the meaning of human dignity is that of Immanuel Kant. He speaks of human worth, or Würde in German. And in Kant, this notion is derived from what he calls a transcendental deduction from the possibilities of human knowledge. It's a very typically Kantian move. He starts from pure reason and deduces certain conditions about what that's all about and what it leads to in terms of freedom. And it leads him then to a concept of dignity that's characterized by the value of autonomy, of independence, of self-determination, and all of that is, I think, an important component of dignity. But what this book brings to the fore in a way that I think is extremely important is that human dignity is not something that exists in a person on his or her own, but it's essentially relational, and it depends upon the interconnectedness between persons to achieve dignity. And indeed, the capacity for relationship is itself a manifestation of human dignity. The capacity for, if you will, mutual respect, or from a Christian and Jewish point of view, the capacity for love is a component of what human dignity is all about. And I think that relational understanding of dignity is highlighted in this book in a variety of ways, both in the more theoretically developed chapters, where someone like Séverine Deneulin articulates a kind of relational understanding of Amartya Sen's capability theories of development. Robert Dowd, in his essay, articulates a very important way in which accompaniment of persons with each other is a very strong support for the development of persons' dignity. That point of accompaniment as a relational concept, related to the relational concept of human dignity, rings some very important bells for me as a Jesuit. I've had a lot of connection with the Jesuit Refugee Service. And Jesuit Refugee Service defines its mission in terms of three forms of activity: accompaniment, service, and advocacy. And JRS is of the strong conviction that accompaniment of being with others on the ground who are refugees in this case is crucial to learning what they really need. And that service, therefore, cannot actually develop adequately without accompaniment preceding it. Being with, and rather than coming in on a trapeze from the highly developed world and sort of suddenly telling people what they need in refugee camps, one has to be there and listen and learn from them what their real needs are. And that service then emerges, adequate service emerges out of accompaniment. This is, I think, in a number of the essays of the book, is developed about the broader development issue, not simply about humanitarian action, but about development as such. Learning what people really need is crucial to providing the kind of development activities that can respond to those needs. And advocacy, trying to develop public policies that respond to people's genuine needs, also has to grow out of an accompaniment that grows up from interaction and growth with people on the ground. Now, I found that that's a very interesting approach. And it has another dimension that has a theoretical orientation to it. I think this relational understanding of human dignity gives an orientation to development work, and I would say to human rights work, that stands very much opposed to the positions that have been recently advocated by a man named Samuel Moyn, who has written extensively about human rights. But Moyn has a fairly recent book called Not Enough, about human rights in an unequal world. And Moyn wants to argue that human rights in their recent forms have grown basically out of the 1970s and a strong anti-communist movement that was over against what was then the Soviet Union, which has given, in Moyn's view, the human rights movement a kind of neoliberal orientation that's based upon autonomy, freedom of choice, and that leads then to the stress on the free market as an important component of human rights. And it puts, in Moyn's view, has put the human rights movement and the neoliberal economic free market orientation to development made them allies. Well, I think what this volume that we're discussing is doing in articulating a relational understanding of human dignity is to say that individual free choice and therefore free markets are not adequate in capturing what development is all about. And that puts both the commitment to human dignity and also the commitment to human rights on a different page than a kind of neoliberal model of development. It's not accidental, of course, that this is coming out of some authors who have strong Catholic roots. The Roman Catholic understanding of the person is essentially social. The notion of freedom and the common good are deeply interconnected with each other, and that there's really no way to achieve personal fulfillment apart from, and that means personal development, apart from interconnection with others. And therefore, freedom is a social project, as Amartya Sen puts it, and it's dependent upon not only making people free to choose their own destiny, but also providing the necessary social and relational conditions that are needed for the achievement of freedom and therefore the achievement of dignity. And I find that puts us onto a different page, a different orientation about thinking about human rights, not simply as autonomous freedom, but also about guaranteeing the necessary conditions of human relationship. Among those would, of course, be certain economic conditions, but also certain other kinds of interconnectedness between persons. I found a number of the essays of the case studies in the volume very rich in showing how accompaniment and social participation are essential to the realization of human dignity. And if that's one's model of development, then a neoliberal economic model won't do the job. There's a need for a more structural and interpersonal support for persons, and not simply to sort of set them free on their own. This goes then, I think, to the roots that could be endorsed from a theoretical point of view, both from a philosophical perspective with Aristotle's talking about the person is essentially social, or from a religious point of view about stressing the love commandment of love of one's neighbor and the relationships that are built up between persons as essential to the realization of their human dignity. It leads me to end by saying I found some interesting echoes at various points about the way human rights are defined by the U.S. Catholic bishops in their 1985-86 Economic Justice Pastoral Letter, where they defined human rights as the minimum conditions for life in community. You could also include that as a definition of human dignity. Human dignity is the requirement for what's necessary, not only for me to live on my own, for me to live effectively in community. So I think that is a very rich contribution to the discussion about dignity, to the discussion about development, and I look forward to some further conversation as we continue.
Thank you so much, David. Dr. Carolyn Wu, please.
Thank you very much for having me. It's just great fun for me to see all of you. Many are old friends and many are giants in this field. So I think, I'm the practitioner in this. I never went to school on the topic of international development. I was just thrown into the field of international development. So now I'm kind of backfilling, I guess, to learn the proper definitions and so on behind the practice. I want to use my time for three things. The first is to talk about why I find this book important, particularly as a practitioner. The second part of it, I want to share with you two stories of what I learned about development. And the third part is really to look ahead and say, with this foundation that you have created, what are some of the important topics to get into? So the first part about the book, I don't know whether I would say I enjoyed the book. I want to tell you, I worked very hard on reading the book. I don't know how many times I actually went on the internet to find a definition of different things, but I learned a lot. I think in the end, the book, what it does is that it talks about what is dignity, not just from a theoretical perspective, but in practice. It talks about why it is important and how to put it into practice and how to institutionalize it. And the next one is, does it work? So what? So your book is about the what, the why, the how, and the so what. Now, this is very important, particularly accessing my background from CRS. Just to give you a sense, CRS is about 76 years old now. It conducts about 1,000 projects every year in over 100 countries. It reaches about 130 million people, and it competes for contracts. Only 20% of our funding, which is about $1 billion, come from donations. The rest of it, you have to compete for funding to demonstrate that your approach works. Your book is very important, and I think a book to establish these foundations for 5 reasons. The first one is that, as you mentioned, there is a lot of dignity washing. Every project is about human dignity. So you want to be clear what is and what is not, because if everything is about human dignity, maybe nothing is. So it's really important to really nail that. The second part is that it's a focus on relationships. You mentioned the communal, the relational aspects of dignity. The question is, does it really work? Does it really work? Because we're now dealing with the soft aspect of development work. And it's very labor intensive, by definition, communal, relational. It's very, it has an extra cost associated with it. And, funders, the people who pay the bill, they get skeptical. They ask questions. It may look nice on your proposal, but is it really worth the spending of their money? So I think the empirical work behind it is very important. The third part of it is that who can argue against dignity? It's always good. There's no part of it which is not good. But the question is it good enough? Does it cross a threshold of something nice? Because that work has to be more than just something nice. And it goes back to the skepticism of people we interact with, which are the people who fund this work. So it's good. Is it good enough? Does it cross a threshold? The fourth point about this is that because if it is not good enough, if it's just nice, the people who pay the cost are not the people who fund us. They're the people we are supposed to serve. And always something good can come about. That's not the issue. But again, is this the optimal way of serving them? Because they don't get many chances. They're not pots and pots and pots of money who follow, where this time we did some good. Well, there will be next time. Well, sometimes there's no next time. So the people who bear the cost, we always have to remember, is not the social service agency, it's not the funder, it's the people in the field, the people we're charged to serve, because they don't have many, many more chances. The last part then, this is important because if it does work, if it does cross the threshold, how do you institutionalize it? It's not just enough to design it into one project or 10 projects or even 100 projects. The whole question is that how do you institutionalize it so that it becomes the ethos and it becomes the architecture, it becomes the calculus, and it becomes the mindset of everybody who works there. And that's an important question. And I think that this book provides the foundation of why this is important. I also want to get into two things I learned as a practitioner. The first one was I was still a board member. And again, board members are like grandparents. They don't know the real reality of what happens. So there was this discussion. It was around the year 2010. And we were talking about education projects in Afghanistan. The US government came to CRS and said, we like the work that you do. We want to give you 10 times the funding. We believe in so much. We want to give you 10 times the funding as a beginner, but can you shorten your projects? It takes you 6 months to get a school going. It takes contractors, and there are a lot of development contractors, 2 months at the most. Can you just take our money and shorten your projects? And the staff's response is, no, we cannot. Even if you give us 10 times the money, we don't believe in that way of working, and it will not work. So I sort of understood, but I didn't understand. I mean, some, said, yeah, I trust our people, but could someone please teach me why building a school that we take 3 times as long? So I actually went to Afghanistan. I was the only board member. And first of all, what I learned was that we don't just build schools or do education. The design of the project actually started with livelihood and water, not education. And so we went in there. The first thing was people needed water. I mean, you're talking about really desolate, rocky, mountainous, isolated sort of places where water source is everything, and how you get into the water table is very important. And so they engage the community. They go into why they need water, what would they use it for, how will they do it? And I just want to say, so first of all, when you ask people, and I saw these flip charts in Afghanistan in these sort of like almost like cave-like type of dwelling. And there were these flip chart sheets that talk about why people wanted water. And of course, it's for sanitation, but it is very important for livelihood or agriculture. It reduces conflict because there's a lot of conflict at the river source where people fight. It saves time because you don't have to go a total of 5 hours every day just to bring back water. And, but one of the things they said it was most important was because for the men, they get to clean themselves and purify themselves before they pray. Right? I would never have learned that. So, but the second thing now is if we save time of 5 hours a day from women and girls, since those are the ones who go and get water, what would we do with them? Now they have this time. Well, they said a school, a school would be the right thing to do. And I asked, why did you want women and girls to be educated? You could give your own answers, but the answer was, we want them to be able to read the Quran. I mean, all right, so excitement about women getting educated to be able to read the Quran. And then there's a whole series of things about how do you support a school? And we are talking about girls and women now getting educated. And do we really have that support? But then there's this whole thing, if we are able to get water in the infrastructure, who will maintain that? What would be needed to maintain this infrastructure? Will there be a cost for its use rather than just a free good? And how will we solve problems? Because some people's homes are located in a way where they have a lot more spill over water, which means that they could make more money than others. But basically, how do we deal with social problems like that? And more important, now that we're going to be wealthy, what are we going to do with that water? What is the underlying set of values for, a richer community? So, and what about new knowledge? What do they need to learn? Well, they need to learn how to build the infrastructure, how to maintain the infrastructure, but they also need to know about irrigation. And now they need to know about new crops. They don't have to grow poppy anymore. They could grow wheat. And wheat actually has higher value. How do they deal with erosion of soil, for example, and also markets? Now that they have this extra production and higher value production, how will they engage the market? And how will they manage money? And how will households who now have more money use their money? I mean, these are all foundational issues for them. So what I learned was that just because you want education, you can't just go in and quote unquote build a school. That's why the schools were abandoned. They were never used. And you can't just go in with the education of girls. It's a big cultural transition. Where would the money come from to support teachers and so on? What time would the girls have to go to school because they have to work? And so there were all these issues related to the fact that you can't just go in, you have to go in through the whole community. And from there, I learned several things about human dignity. First of all, is to pay attention, is to acknowledge those conditions. And I think a chapter in the book talked about it. It's also about how you engage people. What is respect? You don't go in and just say, I think you need these things, and therefore this is the way you do it. I think it's a whole idea of subsidiarity and humility of the people who are coming in to recognize that you're at best a guest. And what I know is two things in addition. One is you don't want to be the voice for the voiceless. I hear in development work, people give talks and so on, and they said, we want to be the voice for the voiceless. That's terrible. You want their own voice. You don't want to speak for them. They have to speak for themselves. And the second one is that the IHD in integral human development is very complex. It is holistic, but anyway, that's the way to go. The second lessons that I learned is that a second example, I was by then working with CRS. I was visiting, we always visit with the bishops of the areas and so on to pay our respects. And on two occasions, at least I remember, one was Haiti, one was the Central Africa region. I was visiting with the bishops and I said, what is it that you want us to do? And they said, basically, we want people to come to us and not to you. And they said, whenever there's problems, both the local political leadership and of course, international leadership, they call CRS, they don't call us. And they said, that's not what we want. We want them to call us. And I said, fair. Yes, that's exactly what we should aim for, is to put ourselves in the back seat and move them into the front seat. And there were several things that were done. One is, how do we, first of all, work with our partners to understand what they want? Because, for example, something like this, it's not that we wanted more education projects or more whatever projects. They said, we want us to grow in particular ways. So there's always a process at the very beginning, working with our partners, and there are 1,200 of them, is what is it that you want? The second one, then to do an evaluation of, where they are at, what do they need? But the second thing is that we place ourselves at evaluation. So every year our partners get to evaluate us, and that really makes us humble, because they get to tell you, no, you're not helping us. No, you're not listening particularly well. And so to place ourselves at evaluation. And the third thing was, of course, learning to do things like this. With Caritas Kenya, I think, we started getting them to write the proposals to USAID. Rather than being the principal actor in this, we became their technical support. So they are the principal on the project. And when they talked about technical support and so on, then they bring us in rather than the reverse. So that was another thing that we looked to do. And we began to share a lot of resources also in our assessments and so on with our local partners, so that they could use those in emergencies and so on to get their own funding.
Thanks so much, Carolyn.
Yeah. Well,
I'm slowing you down ever so politely.
So thank you. But the last thing we did, which is now existing, and we got a grant for that, is we did an Institute for Capacity Building, which is, is on the website. It's like learning resources. And we divide the learning resources into 5 areas, which is how do you develop staff skills? How do you improve the dynamics of partnerships, working with other people? How do you strengthen actually the institution itself? How do you strengthen proposal writing? And how do you strengthen program quality? So those are the 5 areas of the curricula. All of those resources are accessible by anyone. Our local partners, our competitors, our local beneficiaries. We try to put it in 4 languages: English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. I think it's not total, but under each of those is sort of like manuals, training manuals, toolkits, job aids, templates, whatever that we ourselves use. We put it there and say we need to build the capacity of our partners, because just like the bishops, we are this big US somebody who comes in and he said, we don't want people to come to you. We want them to come to us. And I think that is really sort of the dignity of people, not just our beneficiaries, but the local actors. The 5 areas that I think really needs attention from a practice standpoint, one is scale up. It's not enough to cite 10 projects or 15 projects. People are looking for the type of impact that affects billions of people. So we have to attend to, because we believe in this whole relational dignity approach, how do you really scale it up? The second one is, what are the sustainable outcomes? Because if it really works, it's not right after the project. It's 2 years after the projects, 5 years after the projects, 10 years after the project. Do you really see that betterment? And I think the whole monitoring, I see that Paul Perrin used SenseMaker, which is a wonderful sort of like, for people to derive what is important to them. But I think that to be real and accountable, we have to go into the sustainable aspect of this.
Yeah, Carolyn, could we leave a few minutes for questions? Could you wrap it up, please?
Okay, I just have 3 more. The third one is, in the end, we're not just even building capacity. We are building a mentality, which is a growth mentality of people who said we could learn, rather than a fixed mentality. The fourth one, I think Father Hollenborg mentioned the relational aspect, and it has to lead to communal peace and intertribal peace building, because that's the biggest problem. And if we use approach, which is relational, in its foundation, it needs to be able to sort of translate into that. And the fifth thing I want to say is capital. It's really, if people cannot access new capital, whether it's social impact or blended capital, whatever it is, it will be limited. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. My big takeaways: a relational understanding of human dignity that's labor intensive, that is holistic, with the imperative pay attention, and the challenge of translating it into structures and institutional arrangements. We have, let's say, about 20 minutes. We will run a little bit over the 1 hour, but maybe we can end at 1:05, 1:06. Time for questions. As Theresa said at the beginning, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat function or use the electronic hand raise sign. And we have a number of authors present. Welcome and thank you for being here and for contributing. And maybe I will also call on some of the authors to make our discussion a little more colorful. And we received one advanced submission. And the question from the advanced submission is, how will this book help provide a framework for development practitioners? How will this book help provide a framework for development practitioners? May I maybe ask Severin and after that Steve Reifenberg to talk about this question? Severin, are you with us? I gave it a try. Steve, would you like to say something about this question? The book framework.
Clemens, Severin is here. She's
okay.
On.
Severin, are you willing to share some thoughts on this question?
Can I leave it to Steve first?
Great.
Sure. In the interest of being more colorful. Thank you very much. This has been really fun to listen to, and I'm really excited that this book is out. And I do think a real contribution of this book is to take this kind of conceptual framework and then through a series of case studies, really try to ask the question, well, what does that really look like in the context of real people's lives? And so with the incredible Beth Lapsey, who really helped make this happen, I put together one of the chapters, which actually looked at the concept of accompaniment, which connects very much with this conversation around relationship that I think is really important. And I maybe want to say two things about, so the particular thing that we looked at was the work of an organization called Compañeros en Salud, Partners in Health, which is in Chiapas, Mexico. It was a rural communities and bringing quality healthcare to those communities. And the evidence that even though the Mexican Constitution and laws allowed for access to medical care for people in rural communities, nobody's getting it. And so this model of accompaniment was having someone from the community, from the organization, accompany someone on every step of the way to ensure that they got the medical care when they went to the larger city that was needed. So they dramatically changed, the access to care for individuals. But what was fascinating was that trajectory of walking through the system's problems kind of disclosed where the real bottlenecks were. And it allowed then, through this accompaniment approach, this paying attention, close attention to the real lived experience, could begin to address then some of those more systemic issues. And they were able simultaneously to continue to accompany people, but they needed to accompany people physically less and less because they kind of overcame many of those barriers. And so that kind of application of thinking about, for example, this concept, this general concept, I love the comments of Father Hollenbach from the Jesuit tradition about accompaniment, but of kind of how those gained insights in dealing with real systems problems.
Thanks, Steve. Severin, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have something to share, most welcome.
Yeah, because what I was doing was to define the Derrida Amazonia document, because I wanted to quote something there, something from there. Because it's a question that's been haunted me now for quite a while, and listening to this discussion on human dignity after the publication of Derrida Amazonia and also the latest Human Development Report in the Anthropocene, is, and then what David Hollenbach said about our relationships, that human dignity is deeply relational. What are the implications for human dignity when we take account indigenous people who are saying, we are air, we are water? And here I quote from Derrida, Amazonia, paragraph 42, we are water, air, earth, and life of the environment created by God. For this reason, we demand an end to the mistreatment and destruction of Mother Earth. The land has blood, and it is bleeding. The multinationals have cut the veins of our Mother Earth. So what are the implications if we think about human dignity when the human cannot be seen as separate from air, water? And I think what COVID-19 has revealed is that we are microbes, we are bacteria, and there are billions and billions of bacteria in our bodies. And whenever I mentioned to a friendly show where I need to connect with nature, well, there's no point of connecting with nature. We are nature. So I just want to throw that into the pot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Severin. We have a hand raised by David Smille. Could you please ask your question, David?
Hello. Thank
Hello.
you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm a visiting fellow at Kellogg, and this is a fascinating book and a fascinating effort. I look forward to reading it. I've long followed sort of the debates on human rights and critiques, the left critiques that come from people like Moyne, but really, have been around since Marx in the 19th century, that suggest that, very consistent and convenient for capitalism. And one response in the past couple of decades has been to develop the idea of economic, social, and cultural rights. That's been sort of the response. It's been sort of an acknowledgement that just to focus on civil and political rights is too narrow. So we need to complement these things. And so I'm wondering, without having read the book, I promise I will, how you see this emphasis on human dignity and this relational concept of human dignity as adding to that. Are you providing substance to the idea of economic, social, and cultural rights? Are you providing an alternative that works better to sort of provide an anchor against the idea of development? Because that's one of the reasons that the human rights discourse developed, was as sort of a counter control the excess development, whether it's Pinochet or the Khmer Rouge, trying to create a mind. And so I'm wondering, how does this mesh or dovetail with the emphasis on economic, social?
Thank you, David. May I suggest that we ask Paolo first to respond and then Professor Hollenbach?
Thanks for the great question, David. It's important. Now, obviously, in this volume, we don't take the question of economic, social, and cultural rights up directly, but I do think that a lot here is very relevant to it. Within human rights, part of the reason that that's always been a live discussion is that, we have recognized ever since at least the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that economic, social, and cultural rights, are part of the canon and of the sort of the needs of the human person, but B, they're also in certain respects different from other rights. That's why they're kept in a separate part of the Universal Declaration. They're introduced by a separate little chapeau in there. And in that chapeau, it refers to the fact that these rights are realized in community. And so I think what we've done in this book is helped to show why economic and cultural rights, economic and social rights, cultural rights then are a little bit more hybrid and complex, I think, are not merely entitlements to certain material goods that are necessary to sustain physical human life, but rather economic and social rights are themselves relational. They are the conditions in which we are, to sort of paraphrase what David was saying earlier, in relationship with other people and with our communities. They're necessary to develop a full sense of human agency, which is not merely making choices, but freedom in a much fuller sense. So I think a lot of the aspects of dignity that are highlighted by the work of this book will help us make better sense of economic and social rights in a non-reductive way, in a way that's not merely reduced to a series of economic entitlements.
Thanks so much, Paolo. David, would you have anything to add? Please unmute yourself, David.
Yes, just I would say I agree with just what Paolo said. I would want to broaden it, though, and say that human rights altogether have relational dimensions, not just social and economic rights, but civil and political rights, too. For example, the right to free speech. I like to say to my students, it's not my right to sit in my office talking to myself. It's about my interaction with persons that Aristotle sees speech as the essential characteristic of the polis, of the people gathered together. And that's what really makes speech so important, is it's a form of communication. And and that's relational. So I would go one step further and say that the interesting argument that I think is in Stephen Reifenberg and Beth Klopse's essay, where they build upon this notion of accompaniment as sustaining human dignity, but then they also broaden it and say this also has a larger structural and policy orientation as well. It's not just about me and you in an interpersonal back and forth between persons on the ground in a development setting, but it has these structural dimensions. And that's where the structural dimension gets you into domains such as social participation. What kind of structures in society allow people to participate in the life of society? And that's where I think the social and economic rights come into play in a very important way. They enable people to get a job. They enable people to be able to get access to income through the way the economy is structured. So this notion of relational notion of dignity is very highly personalist in the one-on-one framework, but it's also structural in a much more social way. And I think that if we look at that development from that point of view, we're going to look at both of those dimensions, both the interpersonal and the structural at the same time.
Thank you, David. We have a question from Felis Olukunboro. Fidelis, please. Unmute yourself, Fidelis, please. Yes.
Thank you. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Theology. So I look forward to reading the book, but I just want to know, is there a consideration in the text on how a theorist and someone interested in institutionalizing human dignity in a poverty-ridden environment, but also an environment that is suspicious with an idea of universal theory and is also religiously diverse. So, and the theorist in this regard comes for a particular religious background. So is there a consideration on how such thought becomes institutionalized and described within that context?
Thank you, Fidelis. So the question of human dignity, intercultural debates. Carolyn, would you be able to shed some light on this question since you have worked on so many continents?
As I understand the question, it's really about the whole issue of the plurality of cultures and religion and approach. You know, the book stems from a Christian background. How does it work? What I just want to observe is that from practice, and I don't know what the theory shows, is that there is a lot of commonality among religions on the key issues about human well-being. In fact, in Ceres, the phrase is Catholic social teaching may be Catholic inspired, but it is universally applicable. And so it's really on the human rights dimension, it's on the human worth, it's on the human dignity. And so the key really is that is to go in and not assume that our language, not so much we have to watch our values, but our language and how we engage, particularly we work a lot in Muslim countries. The majority of countries we work in are Muslim. Is that how do you demonstrate the ability to respect, to listen, and to allow the project or the work, the intervention to be done within the language and the cultures of that particular country. So it's not that the values are very different, but the ability to really get at that common point cannot be taken for granted, that the common point does exist, but the ability to get at that common point itself takes a lot of work.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Father Bob, are you still with us? Because I thought you as an Africanist could also say something about this question. He was there a minute ago. Father Bob is a busy man. He may have left us. Anyway, friends, we are at 1 o'clock, maybe 5 more minutes. We have a longer question and maybe a short question at the end. The longer question is from Bruno Baroni from AFSI in Italy. Bruno, do you want to ask the question yourself rather than me reading your question?
Hi, everybody. Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so basically, I'm just to say that I'm grateful to be here listening your reflection. It's very interesting. And we at AFSI, we are trying to do our part to make dignity a compass in our day-to-day work. And we are seeing that to do that, the key it is to start from practice. And this is it's odd with the fact that there is plenty of materials in the humanitarian work that describe ideal models, like a type of evaluations, how to write a theory of change, how to measure impacts, models, and this is kind of at odds with the subjective, relational, context-specific that we have been talking about. So I was wondering if you could say something about, if you can comment to what extent referring to predefined guide, it is the way to go, and how much we as practitioners, we should invest in develop our own practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. So the question is negotiating ideal models and practices on the ground. Who would be a good candidate to answer this question or shed some light on that? Kat Bolton, would you be willing to say something about that?
Sure. I could also kind of answer the question that was potentially posed to Bob Dowd, which is essentially that in terms of research, accompaniment is kind of it assumes that there are already working solutions to problems, but in practice and in research and anthropology, what we start with is the need to ensure that you are asking the right questions. That often when development programs and interventions come in, they start from often universalistic assumptions about what people want, what they need, what their hopes and dreams are, and the kinds of development that would help communities. And often those assumptions also stem from ideas of autonomy and individuality that aren't often shared at the local level, as David Hollenbach was very good in highlighting. And so I would say that, in ethnographic work, especially what we're interested in doing is ensuring that the questions that are developed in terms of, basic research and in terms of how to engage in practice that actually helps communities is make sure that those questions are, posed by people themselves about their own lives. What keeps them up at night? What is it that animates the discussions that they have with each other? What are the sources of friction and trouble in their communities? And make sure that it's those questions that animate the practice and not imported questions.
Thank you so much, Kat. Could we come to a conclusion slowly but surely? Please read the book. There is so much more. That's the idea of the launch, to whet your appetite. We received a question in advance from a high school student who was just admitted to Notre Dame. And I would ask Carolyn, David, and Paolo to very briefly respond to this question as your final contribution to this panel. It's an intriguing question. It's very simple. The question is, how can I understand dignity as a verb? How can I understand dignity as a verb? David, go first, then Carolyn, and then finally Paolo, please.
Well, I mean, if dignity is relational, it's also developmental. It's something that's in the process of happening. And so you could say someone dignities in when their life unfolds in a way that is respectful of who they are as a person and respectful of them as a fully human person. And if their life is able to unfold in that way, that's a verb, the unfolding part. It seems to me that's what realization of dignity is all about.
Beautiful. Thank you, David. Carolyn, dignity as a verb.
So I would use to dignify, and actually I use the word that Pope Francis likes to use a lot. To dignify people first is about to engage people. And Bonhoeffer actually defined what it means to engage. It is to see the person. It is to listen to the person. It is to share so that you leave something behind and changes through the interaction, that person and yourself, because that person could affect you. And the fourth part is it is not enough to be with the person. You have to be for the person.
Thank you so much. It's like Emmanuel Levinas. Paolo, before I ask you for your last words, Paul Perrin has something to say about Bruno's question about the ideal models. Paul, could you shed some light on that very briefly, please?
Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry, I didn't want to interject, but I think, Bruno, my role for the last several years has been in monitoring and evaluation, and I've noticed that the field has taken a hard turn towards the objectivity. It has to be definable and observable and measurable. And I think that has helped advance. That was in response to everyone just coming to the table with their own ideas without asking the question, do we make a difference? But I think it's time for us to also complement that with saying there is a room for subjectivity, for the human experience and how people are experiencing these changes, not just saying we've observed this change, but what was that process like for the people involved? And complementing those models and those definitions, those predefined observable things with the more subjective human experience and asking those questions of people. So that's what I would add.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thank you. So coming back to dignity as a verb and last words from the one who created the whole project behind it, Paolo.
Well, thanks for that, for whoever asked that question. It's a wonderful question and provocative. I would answer it with two other words, participation and action. We understand people as acting people. We act. That's what we do as human beings. When we live, we act. And the meaning of what we seek and what we desire, the goods that are animating what we do, are the things that help us to understand what gives dignity to human beings. It's only in action that we understand what a human person is. And therefore, dignity is about acting. And then secondly, the word participation, but not merely, but perhaps in a sort of a larger archetype of the small aspect of participation in community and society that was already mentioned various times, but participation in a good itself. We don't merely receive goods as human beings, we participate in goods. And that is part of acting. And so dignity is not something that's static. It's not something that just exists out there. It's not, quite literally, it's not an object. It is something we participate in by our actions and by, in the development context, by contributing to the possibility of our brothers and sisters around the world to themselves participate in the goods which help to define the fullness of a human life. And that's really what we're all about here.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Fullness of the human life. That's the key word with which we go away. Teresa will put up a reminder slide that you don't forget the book that we are talking about. And it's for me to say thank you to the Dean of the Q School for opening our book launch. Thank you so much to Carolyn and to David for their very rich input and their time and being willing to answer questions. Thank you to all the authors, present and non-present. Sorry for putting some on the spot. Thank you to the audience and for your questions. And obviously, the Keough School of Global Affairs is young and will stay around. So this is only the beginning of us thinking about integral human development and the practice of human dignity. Have a lovely Tuesday afternoon. Thank you to all who made this possible, including the Kellogg staff, Teresa Hanlon, Karen Joseph, and her team. And enjoy the rest of your life. Thank you so much.